What says Christmas better than Christmas movies? Classics like Holiday Inn, Miracle on 34th Street, A Christmas Carol, Christmas in Connecticut. All those greats. And of course, perhaps the greatest of all, Gremlins. So many reasons to check out this holiday classic. It has everything you'd ever want to uplift your spirits in the holiday. Family, hope, caring, monsters, mayhem, and of course, hilarity. And how the movie got made is a fascinating story, which brings us to one of my favorite episodes of 2017. I'm BJ Fennell from the Take Me Through It archives, how a dark, violent script was transformed into a horror comedy classic.
Take Me Through It is made possible by people like you. Thank you for downloading, listening, and subscribing. And leave us a comment on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you.
When we last left our hero, movie producer Michael Fennell, he was basking in the glow of producing his first movie, that cult classic, Rock and Roll High School. But now, Mike and his partners in crime were branching out, leaving the loving arms of his mentor, Roger Corman, to take Hollywood on and grab it by the balls. First, there was Airplane. Then, The Howling. And after that, the story of an adorable little creature, adorable as long as you didn't get him wet or feed him after midnight.
John Davison, who I mentioned, he had left Roger Corman as well, of course, and he produced Piranha that Joe Dante directed, and so he had to move on, and he ended up producing Airplane, and he hired me as sort of to kind of do a bunch of different jobs on the movie. Best screen credit I've ever had. It's generally in charge of lots of things, Mike Fennell. That was my credit at the end of that. That's right. Anyway, so after that, I get a call from Dan Blatt, and he goes, "I'm making this movie called The Howling." And there's a guy that wrote. I won't mention this gentleman's name. If you dig, you'll find it, but there's no reason to bring up his name. But anyway, he had bought the rights to the book, and it was this paper. It was like a supermarket paperback. It was like, and it was about werewolves. And so this guy had bought the rights, and he had made this one low budget movie before. And so Dan made a deal with Avco Embassy Pictures, which was the company founded by Joseph H. Levine, who was sort of, one of those classic old school producers who was still around at the time, who produced The Graduate, and some big movies. Anyway, so Dan said, "Well, I need, I'm doing other stuff. I'm doing TV, and I can't be there all the time. I really need a producer. I'll be the executive producer, and you can produce the movie." So I said, great. This is my first non-Roger Corman movie.
And that's great for the call to come to you instead of you making the calls.
He called me because he had liked the job that I had done on these reshoots that he did for him. So he called me, and so we started working on this movie. And the guy that adapted the script and was going to direct the movie, he wanted to use real wolves, right? So he found this wolf trainer out in the valley, and and it was going to be like, this was not an expensive movie, although it was much more money than I had ever had. It was over $1 million, right. I think.
Wow.
Or no, was it over $1 million? It was maybe a little under $1 million.
And this is 1980, 81.
1980, I want to say, something like that. Because Rock and Roll High School was 1979, and so this was 1980. I think it was released in 81. But anyway, so started working, and it became clear as we were working with this, as I was working with this guy, and Dan was there. I would check in with him and stuff. That this guy this wasn't going to work out. This guy didn't know what he was doing. He was difficult. He was, he was not collaborative. It just wasn't going. It was very obvious that it wasn't going to work out.
Right.
I don't know if it was both my and Dan's idea. Well, Joe Dante would be perfect for this, and so he said, call Joe. You're friends with him, call Joe. And So I called Joe, and Joe was in the middle of working at Universal on a movie that was going to be made. It never was made, but it was National Lampoon's Jaws 3 People Nothing.
And
Right?
it didn't get
And
made?
it didn't get made. I mean, what could have been? What a great
Perfect.
idea, but it did get made. But
Does he
anyway.
still have rights to the title? Because he may need that someday.
So they had made Jaws, and then Jaws 2, which was terrible. I think Dennis Quaid was in Jaws 2.
There
But
was a
anyway,
Jaws 3 too.
so this
wasn't
was going to be Jaws 3 People. National Lampoon presents Jaws 3 People Nothing. Right.
Perfect.
And so it wasn't working out, luckily. And I said, Joe, how would you like to do a werewolf movie? And he said, I love werewolves. Send me a script. So I sent him the script, and the script hewed very closely to the book, and it was not very good.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I'll do it under one condition, that we can throw this out completely and start from scratch, right? So I said, great, because I knew it was, great. So we hired John Sayles. John Sayles had written Piranha. And for those who do not know who John Sayles is, John Sayles is a independent film. He is actually one of the first, I would say, kind of one of the first original, truly independent filmmakers. He what he did to raise money to live on and to raise money for his movies. He and he still does this. He works on big Hollywood movies as a script doctor. He worked on Apollo 13. He's, sometimes he's not even credited. He comes in, but he's extremely fast and very facile, and he's a terrific writer. So we hired John Sayles, and John Sayles must have written the script in a week. But he came up with he came up with the brilliant idea that there would be at the time. This was in the early '80s, late '70s, early '80s. There was something called Esalen, which was in Northern California. It was a new age. This was very much, the era of like these new age kinds of cult is probably too strong a word, but there was like the Orgone box and all this
Right.
kind of airy fairy kind of sort of getting in touch with yourself and all this stuff. So the idea was that there was an Esalen type of institute in Northern California, but they were all werewolves.
Okay, good.
Right. And
It works for me.
And there was a doctor played by Patrick McNee who knew this, and he got all these people together, and he sort of was getting them to stay in touch with their inner werewolf and basically be able to control the impulses and everything. So anyway, so that was kind of the big story breakthrough that he came up with. And so we shot that movie in I think it was 4 weeks. It was 4 weeks. And what we decided was I remember we went to visit the wolves, and Joe Dante, when the wolf almost attacked them, he said, "We're not making this movie with real wolves."
Yeah.
So anyway, and we wanted to, so what we did was we went back to old woodcuts of werewolf legends, and we modeled them after what those things looked like. And they were basically, it wasn't Lon Chaney, with just a guy with hair on his face.
Right.
It was basically wolves standing upright but the legs were still wolf legs, so they had the bend, the impossible bend like a dog's legs,
Mm-hmm.
but they would stand upright and they were big. We decided that really the only reason to do a werewolf movie in 1980 was to have a fantastic on-screen transformation, because what they did in the Wolfman was they just locked Lon Chaney in front of a camera and put like bolts on his head so that he wouldn't move.
That's right.
And then slowly added
like a time
fur,
lapse.
and then oops, God damn it, time lapse. Hair growing on his face, and added the pointy ears, and everything else. So we wanted to really have a physical, painful transition of see somebody turning from a man into a wolf. So that's what we did. I mean, we did this this really great transformation scene.
But the big transformation scene was about to happen, and the lads, Mike and Joe, never saw it coming.
Joe's agent calls us and says, Steven Spielberg wants to send you a script. And it was like,
Right, and Spielberg at this time was a big name. I mean, he had done Jaws. He was
He had
huge.
made Jaws. He had made Close Encounters. You know, he was already a gigantic. He was already the biggest director in Hollywood at that point. You know, and so we said, okay.
I guess if we have to.
So at our crummy little office, you know, the script shows up. This was, of course, you know, before the internet, and you know, it's like physically, you know, somebody delivered the script.
Mike, why would Steven Spielberg send you a script?
Well, first of all, he thought that Piranha. He actually said afterwards that Piranha, which Joe directed, was the best Jaws ripoff. He said.
That's high compliment.
Yeah, right. And he really loved The Howling. He had seen The Howling and just thought and knew that it was not an expensive movie, and so these guys are really resourceful. So we read the script, and it was called Gremlins, and it was by a guy named Chris Columbus, and we thought that was probably a pseudonym. It couldn't be. He couldn't really be a guy named Chris Columbus, and so we read this thing, and we said, well, this is great, but you know, it's like, how are we going to do it? You know,
Very
because
dark, correct?
This was, you know, years before the digital era, so no such thing as computers creating, you know, fantastical images on film. You had to build stuff. You had to do it practically. So we said, well, this is obviously something that we want to pursue, but, you know, we're not sure how we're going to do it, but we'll figure that out, you know. So we met Steven. We went over. He was actually at Warner Hollywood Studio. It was called Goldwyn at the time, and he was mixing either Poltergeist or E.T. I can't remember which, but they were both coming out at the same time. And he was at the sound facility doing the sound mix. And so he came out in the parking lot. He wouldn't let us in there. We couldn't see anything on the screen. Everything was top secret. So we met with him. We talked to him about it. And it was like a brief meeting. And I can't remember everything that was said, but it was like at the end of it was like, great, let's do this. Right? So it was like, okay, good. So Warner's bought the script, and the script was written. His real name was Chris Columbus, and he also went to NYU. He was younger than me. You know, he had been there a couple of years after me. And the reason he got the idea was, I guess he lived in a crummy apartment in New York, and at night he would hear mice scurrying around, and he decided that, you know, most horror movies with monsters, you know, there's a gigantic, huge monster. He said, you know, what's actually is scarier than a big is something little that can actually hide, you know, and then jump out at you. You know, that's actually. So he came up with this idea of Gremlins, and in the first draft of the script that we read was really. It was like R-rated violence.
Very dark.
Very dark. There was a scene where the Gremlins kill the mother, and her head comes rolling down the stairs. You know, and there's a great scene where they go into a McDonald's. The hero and the heroine go into a McDonald's, and all of these people are sitting, and all the burgers and fries are untouched, but the people are eating. You know. Yeah.
Oh, you could have salvaged that. Come on, that would have been great. You could have salvaged that somehow.
So we did something like 9 or 10 rewrites with Chris Columbus, and to make it more.
And he was open to that.
Huh? Well, listen, are you kidding? He wanted to get his movie made. I mean, he had written this script. Nobody, when his agent sent it around, they didn't think anybody was going to actually make it. They sent it around as a writing sample. So you could say, you know, this proves that this kid can write. Obviously, nobody's going to make this ridiculous movie, but he can write. And Steven said, I want to make this. You know. So then it was a long process. And in the mean of rewriting the script and figuring out how to make the damn thing, and we actually had to write. A lot of the rewrites were to make it things that we could actually do physically, as you know, because in the script they were running around, and you couldn't. You couldn't have puppets. How do you have puppets running around?
Right.
You know, so we had to figure out a way to cheat it to make you think that you saw them running around, but you didn't really. So it was to make it more kind of kid friendly and to make it more practical. All these rewrites, and also, and then we hired. I asked Rob Bottin to do it, and he was working with Ridley Scott on something, so he wasn't. So we hired Chris Walas, who had worked on Piranha. Actually, he did some of the rubber fish on Piranha, and he had worked on Raiders of the Lost Ark. He actually did these famous scenes at the end where the melting faces,
Right.
where they open up the Ark of the Covenant and the bad guys all melt.
Yep.
That was him.
That was great.
And so I talked to Chris. We made a deal with Chris, and then he needed many, 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 many months to build the Gremlins. We needed a lot of them.
How many
And
did you end up building? You remember?
I don't know if it was 100, but it was close to 100. Right. Okay. Now, and the results, obviously, there were really complicated ones for close-ups, and then there was ones that were just literally hand puppets for like background. They were literally just rubber hand puppets. With just like that. But those were for the backgrounds. But the really complicated ones has all kinds of mechanics and gears and everything else. We had no idea what people would think about it. Steven, luckily, because it was Steven, he didn't want to go out to a preview with temporary music and scores and sound effects and everything. He really wanted to basically finish the movie. Mm-hmm. We could still make changes afterwards, but he wanted the real music, and so we were able to really pretty much finish the movie. And this was actually, we first worked with Jerry Goldsmith, who did the score on the Twilight Zone movie. And it was a tremendous collaboration, a great guy. So we didn't have to think about it. He was going to do Gremlins. And I remember going to his house, because what he did was he had a studio, a little studio in his house with like a synthesizer in those days. That was really high tech and everything. Right. And he would, or like an electric piano, and he would compose on the synthesizer. So you could actually get an idea of what it was going to be like, more or less. But of course, then you would record, when it was all done, you would record it with a gigantic orchestra. So I remember I was doing something else, and I was late. I was coming from somebody else, but Stephen and Joe were already there. So I walk in, and Stephen goes, "See what you think of this." And he starts playing the Gremlins thing, right?
Now, hold on a second, Mike. Let's take a moment and listen to that classic theme song. Demented carnival, indeed.
That's exactly right.
That is great stuff. That's hilarious. And that's Gremlins Rag by Jerry Goldsmith, courtesy of Warner Brothers Entertainment. We thank Warner Brothers for allowing us to use that small clip of that classic by the great Jerry Goldsmith.
And I mean, he just, and so it was a brilliant score, and it elevated the movie to this whole other level. And the other thing that did that were the sound effects, because the Gremlin voices, and we worked with a guy named Mark Mangini, who then did the sound effects on virtually all of our movies from then on. Also a brilliant guy, and he came up with, he went out and he found actors to do the Gremlin voices, and he created a Gremlin language. Because it didn't, they weren't lip syncing. So so when we shot it, they were just, if they were to say, they would just go like this, And so he created the Gremlin's language, like, water was glub glub, and that kind of thing, and this silly language, and gizmo caca, because they didn't like gizmo, so it's gizmo caca,
So who are some of the actors that you hired?
Well, one was Frank Welker, and most people don't know who Frank Welker is, but Frank Welker is, I think he still is, pretty much the premier cartoon voice actor. I mean, he has been on so many movies you just hear his voice, and characters in cartoons, and he's incredibly talented, hilarious voice artist. And so he played Stripe and a lot of the Gremlins, but Gizmo, the pivotal role of Gizmo, was played by Howie Mandel. Anyway, he was hilarious, and he also was, he could improvise. So he would just come up with these hilarious things, and we thought we were going to have to speed up the voice a little bit, but we really didn't. I mean, because he was able to do this really little Gizmo voice. Yeah, Gizmo. So then so it was basically done, and we went out to preview, and I tell you, there is nothing worse than going out and putting this movie that you worked on for 2 years, in this case,
wow,
in front of an audience. These people don't give a shit how much work,
no, that's right,
how long it took.
How do you choose the where and the when to do a preview? You do it in LA or
no? This was up. We went up to, I think it was Sacramento, actually, of all places.
Well,
they want to go. We always went. You always go out. We always went out in those days. Right. I don't know what they do now, but in those days you always went out of town because you don't want any Hollywood people to be there.
That's
you just
not
want
the audience, right.
You want regular people,
right?
Right. So Sacramento, and all these people come in, and you're sort of staring at these people going, they're going to hate it. You know, it's like, and so the movie starts, and the audience, it's going well. And then there's the scene where Hoyt Axton, who plays the father, brings the box home, and he says, to Billy, to his son, Billy played by Zach Galligan, and here's your Christmas present. And Gizmo pops out of the box, and the hands come up, and and the audience goes, oh, like I said, we go,
oh. Got him. We got him. That's a hit.
So well, that was one, but still, we knew that there was, people. Okay, well, now they think it's E.T. too, right? They think it's got this
wholesome, happy ending.
People didn't know. They said they had no idea what this was. The guy gets up before and says, "Oh, we have this movie called Gremlins," and the audience goes, "Oh, great! We have no idea what that is, but okay." And so at that point, we figured, well, they think it's E.T. too. And now, what happens when the Gremlins show up, right? And so the first scene where you actually see them is the scene where the mother has the battle with them in the kitchen.
Oh, classic.
And so first you see the Gremlin full on, and the audience goes, wow, they make and then there's that scene where it ends up where the Gremlin goes into the microwave. The audience went apeshit. The place explodes, and I turn to Joe and I go, you know what? I think this is a hit. I don't want to jinx it, but I think we have a hit.
You know what? If you can make it in Sacramento, you can make it anywhere. Yeah. So that was a good sign.
And then afterwards, and so they loved the movie and they applauded the end, and then they fill out they fill out cards, and the scores were through the roof, were fantastic. So it was great, but still there was actually still some tweaks that we wanted to do. And we did those. We shot for another day or two, adding a little. Steven wanted, and he was right, wanted to make Gizmo more of the hero at the end when they kill Stripe, because it originally was Billy that does it, and he wanted Gizmo to play more of a role in destroying the bad Gremlins. So we shot the thing where he pulls the shades down in the greenhouse and Stripe melts in the fountain and that whole thing.
Who had to break the news to Zach Galligan that he wasn't going to be the hero?
No. He has said that in the he has said that in some of the commentaries and stuff. He says he was like, when he saw the movie, he goes, wait a minute.
Oh, okay. And Zach, of course, played Billy.
He played Billy, yeah.
But we really haven't gotten into what makes Gremlins work, even after all these years. I want to read 2 comments. I just saw these recently. Here's the first one. These are fans of the movie. I saw these on YouTube. This movie is the ultimate FU to soccer moms and sensitive parents. And I highly respect it for that. You would never see a movie made like this today. Here's another one. I want to take Gizmo and throw him into the middle of the ocean and just sit back and watch as things slowly go to hell. Mike, these comments were from last month. The movie was made 33 years ago. You gotta explain that to me.
Well, I think I've always thought that the major appeal of this movie is wish fulfillment. And by that I mean that the audience, especially kids, which I think is, the primary, was and still is the primary, not necessarily kids, but young people, the primary audience for the movie. Wish fulfillment in that you wish kind of that you could act like the Gremlins. You wish you could throw caution to the winds, do anything you want, wreck things, and not care what anybody thinks,
and laugh your way through
laugh
it.
about it,
because that's all they do in the movie.
That's right. So I think that is a huge part of the appeal.
I also, I looked at it. I watched the movie again from beginning to end this morning, and of course it is. I don't know what the genre would be. Hilarious horror, perhaps. Maybe that's
horror comedy is what
if there is such a thing, horror comedy. But I want to get into what I call some of the throwaway lines. And some of the throwaway lines that include gentle foul language, as I call it. Now, the movie has a Capra-esque beginning. We see Kingston Falls, which bears an uncanny resemblance to Bedford Falls from It's a Wonderful Life.
That's right.
Were you dissing Frank Capra?
No, but you know what? We had to get permission to use the clip of It's a Wonderful Life that's it's playing on the TV when Billy comes home. And
that's great. That's an homage because the mother is watching that clip wistfully. You can see she's like, oh, what a great life. This is what a great movie. You can, things aren't going so well for the Peltzer family. Randall's out there trying to sell the bathroom buddy and all that stuff. Billy doesn't really like his job, and Mom's just trying to keep the family together.
That's right. And Mrs. Deagle, of course, is the Mr. Potter character. When Mrs. Deagle gets sent up on the little, on the electric chair when the Gremlins screw around with the innards of the electric chair that's on the stairway, and she gets catapulted out. As she goes by the picture of her husband, who, and of course it's a portrait of Edward Arnold, and we had to get permission from his heirs, who were thrilled. They were thrilled. They said, well, we're so moved that you want to use our father's image in the movie. It was great.
Oh, that's great. A couple of other throwaway lines, and this is what sort of catches you off guard in the very beginning because you think it's going to be this sweet little movie, and then Dick Miller, who's kind of the kindly but somewhat grumpy Mr. Funderman. Dick Miller didn't play Mr. Funderman, you jackass. It was Mr. Futterman, Futterman, Futterman. He says under his breath, goddamn foreign cars. That comes out of the blue. It's like, wait a minute, this is not E.T. we're watching.
That's right.
And then Corey Feldman, when he's dragging in the Christmas tree, he's just a kid. Was he 12 years old? He mutters, Christ.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the deputy wants to drive when he and the sheriff are leaving. And the deputy says, oh, you always get to drive. And off camera, you hear the sheriff say, because I'm the sheriff, asshole.
That's right.
What about using some of these? We talked about this briefly. And using American institutions, as I call them, to tell the story while gently poking fun at them. We talked about It's a Wonderful Life, and you really didn't poke fun at that because that was playing in the television in the kitchen. But, I mean, Hemo the Magnificent.
Yes.
What about Do You Hear What I Hear by Johnny Mathis as all hell's breaking loose.
That's right.
And, of course, the knifing scene from Psycho when she's knifing.
Of course.
I mean,
Joe Dante is nothing if not a movie buff, and when I say a movie buff, that doesn't begin to describe. I mean, he knows running times of movies. I mean, he's seen everything, and so all of his movies are. He loves getting in little homages to other movies, and so this is jam packed with those.
And these are the types of things that would go past a younger audience.
Oh yeah,
we watch this.
Well, they would go past a lot of people that don't know as much about movies.
And again, one of the funniest lines I thought was when they're in the movie theater and they're watching Snow White, and they're singing "Hi ho, hi ho," and Billy says, "They're watching Snow White, and they love it."
Right.
That was a classic, absolute classic. Oh God! But again, the magic of how it has continued. We talked about earlier in this episode how it was a big hit. You played in Sacramento. It's like, it's a huge hit. Thank God, everybody's happy. But I'm not sure if I truly still understand it. All I know is I watched it this morning, 33 years after I first saw it, and I was laughing my ass off again.
Well, you never know. Because we had no idea. I mean, we were afraid that people would either like not buy it or just say this is ridiculous, or when you see these little rubber puppets. But I think what we realized is that when an audience comes down and sits down in the theater, they want to be convinced. They're there to have a good time. So you really have to screw up for them to totally turn against you.
Well, I've seen a lot of movies like that where they have screwed
up. Absolutely. But this, for some reason, it was the right movie at the right time. I think that the person on YouTube that said that you probably couldn't make this movie now is right, because the studios are much more cautious now. In fact, the studio at the time, when they first saw it, when Warner Brothers saw the first rough, we showed the first rough cut to Steven Spielberg, and he loved it. He thought it was great. And then we made some editorial changes, and then we had to show it to Warner Brothers. They did not know what to make of it. They really didn't. They were concerned, actually.
Which is exactly what you wanted.
That's right.
Come clean.
Absolutely, of course. They were concerned because they if it's not like something else, they don't know how to react to it. And of course, movies that are like things that something that's already been done, the audience isn't interested in that. The audience is interested in something new. They don't want a rehash of something old. So they were saying, well, God, they couldn't think of what this movie was like. Well, it wasn't like anything. And that's one of the reasons it was a hit, because it took people totally surprise. It came out after a couple of years after E.T., and the advertising led you to believe that it was possibly kind of like E.T. And then when you sit in the movie and you don't know anything about it, when you see Gizmo and he's incredibly cute, and well, it is kind of E.T. too. And then when things change, when he gets wet and he eats after, then it all hell breaks loose, and it's, oh my God, it's a totally different. Now, some people, some parents were outraged at that.
Thank God there was no social media back then. You guys would have gotten crushed.
I remember sitting in one screening, and everything's going great, and the audience loves it, and then at the point where the Gremlins show up, this outraged mother goes storming up the aisle, dragging her little kid, who was probably 4 or 5, and he did not want to leave.
Of course not.
He was like, and she was like dragging him. No, you're not going to see this anymore. This is ridiculous. I thought this was going to be E.T. too. And he was screaming, no, what are you? It's hilarious.
I'm sure he's had a chance to see it.
Yeah. Hopefully he's seen it since. Yeah, he's now 45, so hopefully.
That's right. Well, you never know.
I'm telling you, invest some time to watch Gremlins this holiday season. Phoebe Cates' monologue on why she hates Christmas alone is worth the price of admission. Thanks for listening, subscribing, and telling your friends all about us. I'm BJ Fennell. Happy holidays. Take Me Through It is a production of Fennell Communications, LLC.